Right now, in the spring of 2026, a £1.2 million steam locomotive is rolling across America for the first time in its history. Big Boy number 414 is heading east, through Nebraska, across Ohio, into Pennsylvania and New York, and crowds are lining every platform to watch it pass. 8 major cities, more than 50 whistle stops, a 4th of July celebration in Philadelphia. Union Pacific's chief executive officer told an industry crowd in January that the railroad couldn't be prouder to share this powerful piece of history with the nation. The promotional materials are immaculate. The brochures document 164 years of Union Pacific history. There is one story that does not appear in any of them, and it happened on a train that looked exactly like the one coming to your city. To understand what Union Pacific is not saying about Big Boy 4014, you have to start with the problem that created the machine in the first place. In 1940, Union Pacific operated the overland route, the main freight corridor connecting the Midwest to the Pacific coast, running through Wyoming and Utah. Most of that route was manageable, but 2 stretches were not. The Wasatch Range east of Ogden, Utah presented a 1.14% eastbound grade that ran for 65 continuous miles. Wasatch was a relentless climb, and Sherman Hill west of Cheyenne, Wyoming climbed to the Continental Divide at 8,000 feet on a 1.55% westbound grade. Sherman Hill cut trains in half. At those grades, Union Pacific's best locomotive, the 4664 Challenger, could not haul a full freight train without help. Doubleheading meant 2 Challengers hitched together, doubling the fuel cost and crew cost for a single run. Helper engines meant additional locomotives stationed at remote sidings in the middle of Wyoming, burning coal and waiting, along with their crews, for the next train that would need them pushed over the summit. The arithmetic was ugly. Every train that required helpers was a train that ran slower and cost more, and the overland route was not a secondary line, it was the spine of the railroad's western freight operation. A war was coming. Freight volumes were climbing every month as the country prepared for it. Union Pacific President William Jeffers looked at the grade and the helper operations and the cost per ton mile and issued a directive to his Vice President of Research and Mechanical Standards, Otto Jabelmann. Build a single locomotive capable of pulling 3,600 tons over the Wasatch unassisted. No helpers, no doubleheading, one machine. The overland route was hauling the freight that was building America's war machine, and every week that Jabelmann's department took to answer that mandate was another week of helper engines burning coal on a Wyoming hillside, doing nothing useful. Before the crash that nobody reports, you need the numbers for the machine that caused it. 25 Big Boy locomotives were built exclusively for Union Pacific by the American Locomotive Company at its Schenectady, New York plant. 20 were built in 1941 and 5 more in 1944. 132 feet long, including the tender. 1.2 million pounds, heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 747. Peak drawbar horsepower, 6,290 at 41 miles per hour. Maximum tractive effort at startup, 135,375 pounds. The design target was 3,600 tons over the Wasatch grade. Tests conducted in April 1943 showed Big Boys pulling 4,200 tons, 600 tons past what Jeffers had required. Each of the first 20 units eventually crossed 1 million individual revenue miles before retirement. One Big Boy cost $265,174 to build in 1941, roughly $5.8 million in today's dollars. These are the statistics Union Pacific uses. There is a statistic they do not use, and it belongs to a man named Ralph Vicente, who had been employed by Union Pacific for 80 minutes on the morning that 3 men died. Otto Jabelmann was not handed his position. He started as a laborer in Union Pacific's engine facilities in Cheyenne, the same city where Big Boy 4014 lives today, and worked upward through crew caller, machinist apprentice, machinist, roundhouse foreman, and division foreman before Jeffers put him in charge of research and mechanical standards in 1936. He studied engineering at Stanford and the University of Michigan. He understood locomotives from the ground up because he had worked on them from the ground up. When Jeffers gave him the mandate, Jabelman's design team had a working specification in 6 months. Alco built the first locomotive in the next 6 months, 12 months from requirement to delivery for the largest steam locomotive in the history of American railroading. Historian Tom Morrison described the engineering approach directly. The Challenger had been comprehensively redesigned from first principles. Jabelman's team enlarged the firebox to 235 by 96 inches, roughly the footprint of a 2-car garage. They raised the boiler pressure to 300 pounds per square inch, specified an axle load that would not require rebuilding the bridges on the overland route, and added 4 driving wheels, for 16 total across 2 articulated engine trucks. The articulation was the structural solution to an unusual problem. At 132 feet, a rigid frame locomotive would bind in curves. By hinging the 2 engine sets at the center, the locomotive could negotiate the same track geometry as a standard freight engine while generating twice the tractive force. The class was supposed to be named the Wasatch, after the mountains. An unknown machinist at the Schenectady plant settled that. While number 4000 was still under construction, he chalked 2 words on the smokebox door. Life magazine photographer Dmitry Kessel captured the image. The name spread through the plant and into the press before management could do anything about it. Big Boy. There is one piece of the Big Boy story that never makes it into the promotional materials, and it is not the disaster, it is the fuel. Union Pacific owned the Wyoming coal mines that fed every fire in every Big Boy tender. At full throttle, these locomotives consumed 11 tons of coal per hour. Every ton came out of Union Pacific's own supply chain at internal cost, with no margin paid to an outside supplier. No competitor hauling freight over the Wasatch could replicate that operating economy, because no competitor owned the source. The Big Boy was not just an engineering answer to the Wasatch grade. It was a vertically integrated economic weapon, and the men who built it understood exactly what they had done. Number 4000 arrived at Union Pacific's Omaha facility on September 5, 1941, weeks before Pearl Harbor. The war freight followed immediately. Steel, military equipment, and material moved west in volumes the railroad had never handled. The Big Boys went into Wasatch service from delivery day forward, and the 1943 dynamometer tests confirmed what the operational months had already shown: 4,200 tons on the 1.14% grade, 600 tons beyond the specification on a locomotive that had taken 12 months to design and build. Jim Ehrenberger joined Union Pacific in Cheyenne in 1953 at 16 years old. He remembered what it felt like when a Big Boy left town. He said the ground kind of vibrated a little more than it did with the other types of locomotives, and they were very, very powerful. By the late 1940s, the Big Boys had been reassigned east, hauling westbound manifest freight over Sherman Hill, from Cheyenne up to the divide at 8,000 feet and down to Laramie. The first 20 units were approaching 1 million individual revenue miles each by the early 1950s, and there was something in those performance numbers that the designers in Schenectady had not built a solution for. A Big Boy's tractive effort was large enough to snap a coupling under the wrong conditions at speed. Operating rules had to be written around what these machines did at full throttle. The infrastructure around them, track, switches, and the people who managed both, was not rated for what a Big Boy could generate if that infrastructure was wrong. At approximately 3 in the morning on April 27, 1953, a Union Pacific callboy named Jim Dover ran a crew call in Rawlins, Wyoming. The fireman on the list, a man named Lawrence Endres, was already at the yard. Endres was 23 years old. He had returned from 2 years of service with the United States Army Railroad Division in Korea, and he had come in early specifically to refamiliarize himself with the Big Boys after his time away. Dover stood with him outside the dispatch office in the early morning cold and talked while Endres waited for the engineer. Engineer Leo Murry arrived at the engine, 42 years old, 20 years with Union Pacific, a wife named Lillian at home in Rawlins, and 2 children, Patricia, aged 13, and Michael, aged 9. The head end brakeman was James Anderton, 36 years old, a World War II veteran, survived by wife Anne and 2 children of his own. At 9:10 in the morning, Extra 4005 West passed through Wamsutter, Wyoming, heading westbound at 50 miles per hour. 62 freight cars trailed behind the locomotive. Light mist, a gentle descending grade, everything routine. 8.5 miles ahead, at a siding called Red Desert, a section foreman named Kenneth Mayfield was organizing a crossing for a sheepherder who needed to get his flock across the tracks. He had unlocked both switch points on the siding and positioned his section workers. He assigned one of them, Ralph Vicente, to stand at the eastern switch and operate it on his signal. Ralph Vicente had been employed by Union Pacific for 80 minutes. He did not speak or understand English. Mayfield walked 300 yards back toward the sheepherder. Vicente, standing alone at the switch, opened it. He turned and saw Big Boy 4005 bearing down on him at 50 miles per hour. He tried to close the switch. He ran out of time. Anderton and Endres saw the open switch first. They screamed at Murray. Murray crossed the cab, looked, and threw the brake into emergency. Extra 4005 hit the open switch at 50 miles per hour. Extra 4005 rolled onto its left side, tearing up rail and roadbed as it went. Its tender tore through the cab from behind. Behind them, the first 12 cars piled 70 feet high. Leo Murry and Lawrence Endres died on impact. Live steam shot 100 feet into the air. Rescuers could not approach the wreck for 25 minutes. James Anderton was alive in the destroyed cab, his left leg pinned between a wooden seat and the steel wall, in a space 18 inches high and 4 feet wide. A doctor reached through a narrow opening in the wreckage to give him morphine. Anderton told the rescue workers what had happened. He said they threw the switch right in front of them, and they did not give them a chance. He felt the engine rock. The next thing he knew, he felt the steam hitting him in the face, and he thought he was a goner. Rescue workers spent 10 hours removing coal and cutting through steel before they freed him. James Anderton died at 10:57 in the morning on April 29th, from 2nd and 3rd degree burns covering 80% of his body. The cargo from the 18 derailed freight cars was scattered across the Wyoming desert. There were dented tractors, dead livestock, typewriters, and sewing machines. The investigation into the deaths of 3 Union Pacific crew members was held in a meeting closed to the public and the press. There was no open hearing. The Interstate Commerce Commission and Union Pacific concluded that foreman Kenneth Mayfield had been negligent in assigning an untrained, non-English-speaking worker to a safety-critical switch. Ralph Vicente was found responsible for throwing it. What sentences, if any, were handed down has never been part of the public record. Big Boy number 4005 was transported to the Union Pacific repair facility in Cheyenne. It was repaired. It was returned to revenue service. It ran for 9 more years. Union Pacific retired the entire Big Boy fleet between 1959 and 1962 as diesel and gas turbine locomotives took over the mountain routes. Number 4005 now sits at the Forney Museum of Transportation in Denver, Colorado. The derailment scars are still visible on its left side. Every April 27th, the Forney Museum holds Big Boy Day in memory of Leo Murry, Lawrence Endres, and James Anderton. In 2013, Union Pacific reacquired number 4014 from a museum in California. In 2019, the first fire was lit in 60 years. In 2026, number 4014 is crossing the Mississippi River for the first time, heading into Indiana, Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia for the 4th of July. The promotional materials list 164 years of Union Pacific history. The names Leo Murry, Lawrence Endres, and James Anderton appear in none of them. A machine does not carry the memory of the people who operated it. That responsibility belongs to everyone else, and now you know.